Today we're going to try to talk about how to try to address a psychological problem that a person might have, or maybe a friend has it, maybe they're working on it together. And so the way a person can do this is, first of all, there are various kinds of problems. They would have to think about what the problem is. It could be, if they're a workaholic, that could be a problem, or an alcoholic, or any number of addictions to drugs or money. Or it could be a sleeping disorder, it could be manic depression, it could be OCD, narcissism, or an addiction to food, or an addiction to making money, addiction to power, or power, I guess, would be the other one. But there are also other psychological problems which could be addressed. I couldn't think of every one of them. So once the person knows which problem they're thinking about, then they can think back to think if they were ever rewarded or punished in regard to this particular problem, something that they think might be connected with it, such as a workaholic. They can think back, was I rewarded as a child, when you really don't need to be rewarded for working because you're getting free room, free board. There's no reason. That's an artificial reward. That's an artificial payment. When you're an adult and you're really working, then you do get paid, and that is not a reward. But when you are a child, it is an artificial reward to get paid for working, or for grades. That's another example. If you're paid because you got an A, well, you're lucky you got an A. It's artificial to be paid for that. So you think back, let's say I was paid as a child, or I was given some other reward for working, an extrinsic reward, not the natural reward of saying thank you or something like that, but an extrinsic, non-connected reward. And then the next step, after figuring out what the situation was, the next step would be to write. You need to analyze it, but in order to, you need to analyze the whole situation. And so the way you can analyze it further, you've already analyzed that much, but the way you can go further is by writing a letter to the person that gave you the reward. And you can say, you meant well, and thank you for meaning well, but that was not such a good idea because of this. Look at how I'm such a workaholic today. Actually, that was by your mistake of giving me that reward, or all those rewards. You probably got many rewards before you have a big problem. The bigger your problem is, the bigger I think that the rewards were, or maybe one time, a very memorable reward, something like that. Then you write to that person, and in the process of writing to that person, it becomes more objective. And the situation, you look at it more objectively. You look at yourself also kind of from a distance, rather than being all emotionally involved in wanting to work all the time. You can look at it from a more of a distance, and you might even see where you did something wrong, like maybe you were rewarding some people when you shouldn't have been, or maybe you were punishing somebody. Maybe you were punished once for not working, but you think back and you figure it out, and then by writing the letter, it becomes more objective, and it also could become deeper, and you might connect it with some other problem. As time goes by, you might figure out more things, depending upon how deep or how many problems you might have, or how often this has happened in your life. Maybe in several ways you were rewarded for working. But that's just a very small problem. And I don't have very much experience with it because I myself am far from a workaholic. I am very, I tend more to the lazy side myself personally. But I can give you an example of a friend of mine who had a problem of delusions. And she and I worked on her problem. And I wanted to use this theory to help her because I had helped myself with several issues that I had. So when she brought it up, I asked her if what it was a delusion in regard to some people that she was looking at their face. She couldn't see their face. She'd see all sorts of other things or other faces, and it was really a delusion she was having. So I asked her, what did who were these? These were all men, and they were all men, and she was attracted to all of them, and that's what they had in common. So we found a pattern, and once we found that pattern, I asked her if she had ever been punished by a man, and she said yes. And it was her husband, her last husband. She had been married more than once. Her last husband had punished her every time she came home. He'd be saying stuff, and he really punished her much worse after that. And so I told her, write a letter to him and tell him what you really think, what you think about his punishing you, how unfair and terrible it was, or whatever you have to say. And she did just exactly that. And that helped her a lot to objectify it, I guess, and she felt better right away. She wasn't seeing, at that point, she wasn't seeing any more of those delusions. When she looked at these three men's faces, she no longer had that problem with those. But in the process of writing the letter, she, I think, started analyzing. I'm not sure how she did this because she did it all on her own. But she did tell me later that she discovered somewhere along the line that she herself was rewarding years. She was rewarding men. And not only the men that she had a relationship with, but her brother and her son, she would use rewards with them. So she realized more about herself, and as time went on, certain triggers took place, and she was having bad reactions. And each time I told her she had to write more letters until she took care of all the issues, because right now you might feel really good after you figure out one issue, but then it might very likely come back again. So try to write the letters before the issue comes back if you know which letter to write. And so each time she had an issue, she would write more and more letters, because in her life she had had a lot of pain and struggle, because she had been punished many times, and her own father punished her a lot when she was a child, and her whole family backed him up, and she was one of the younger kids, and they would just all take off after her. And so she had a very hard childhood, and she had to work all that out of herself by writing, and analyzing. As she's writing, it's starting to become objective, and she can see more clearly. And as she was doing that, she saw more and more, she had more and more memories come back to her of terrible things that happened to her when she was young, that she had somehow purposely put out of her mind and not thought about for all those years, and actually forgotten. But in this particular time of maybe stress, or for whatever reason, when it started coming up with those delusions, it all started, that started like a chain of events where she was able to go all the way back to her childhood and really take care of a lot of baggage that she didn't even know she was carrying. And she very often, in between time, when she'd finish up with one problem and not have another one come up, she would say, oh, I feel so free and so good. So that's what we would like to share with you. She and I would both like to share with anybody that this could help. So I hope you try it and I hope it works.